Hello, everyone. This is a Call to Actions Radio. Today is July 13th, 2014, and our hosts today are going to be Bobby Vaughn Jr., Eugene Irvin, and myself, Kimberly Schultz. Our subject matter is dissociation and CIA mind control, child satanic ritual abuse, and many others referring to the abuse of children. Our guest today is Judy Byington, and we have a lot to cover, so we'll get started here. Judy, thank you so much for being with us today on a subject that's very sensitive, and not a lot of people are covering this area for many reasons, but we're here to not only expose what's been going on, but to be part of the solution and preventing it from being carrying on into any other child having to deal with this kind of thing. So thank you for being with us, and let's just go ahead and jump in there and tell us what your background is and how you got involved in this area of work.
Well, I really appreciate being asked to be on the show. This is an area which is not covered by the mainstream media, and it's very disturbing what is going on. First of all, my background is I have been a therapist for 23 years. I was a supervisor over Alberta Mental Health and CEO of Utah Family Counseling Center in Provo. I also worked in child welfare and did private therapy. But during this time, I would have people come into my office and they would say things like, I can't remember my childhood, and I have blank periods. I really didn't understand at that point in time what was going on. It wasn't until I actually retired that I came to realize how evasive this problem is such a huge problem within our society of satanic ritual abuse. Satanic ritual abuse is the torture, rape, murder of children is essentially what it's all about. It's usually done in multi-generational, what they call multi-generational satanic families, where the parents, especially the father, does it to the children, and then they grow up and they either stay within the satanic worship or they become a survivor of the satanic worship and get some therapy for what's going on. But because of this, it's been going on for generations and generations. I became involved in it back in the early 1990s. I had to retire from therapy because I had a very ill daughter. Because I was retired, there were some people who came to me. They were the children, actually, of a satanic coven leader. They were his eldest daughter and his niece. They had recently ran into each other downtown. They hadn't seen each other since childhood, but because this man had been arrested by the Utah Attorney General Satanic Ritual Abuse investigators, they started having memories of their abuse, and when they ran into each other, they realized that their memories corresponded and validated each other. They were having memories of being raped by their fathers, by seeing child murders, by seeing child tortured and being tortured themselves. These are called repressed memories. What we're really talking about here is disassociation. We all dissociate. For instance, if you go through a trauma, if you say you're in a car accident and you can't remember the accident, that's a dissociation. Think of it on a spectrum that daydreaming is a dissociation, and we all daydream. If you're listening maybe even to this program and you're not particularly wanting to hear the subject matter, you daydream. So that's a dissociation. It's a disconnect from life events. And then kind of in the middle of that spectrum is post-traumatic stress disorder, which, of course, we see a lot in veterans of war, where they go through a lot of trauma, and then when they get back home and into a safe environment, then they start having flashbacks of these harrowing events that they've been through. That's repressed memories coming to the surface, is all that is. Then in the far end of the spectrum is multiple personality disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. Now the DSM, which is the psychiatric manual, refers to it as dissociate identity disorder. But multiple personalities generally happen to children because it has something to do with the developing brain. When a child undergoes prolonged trauma over a long period of time, then how their mind copes with that trauma is to repress those memories. Think of your mind as a tree, and the trunk of that tree is your core personality. And say you are a child and you're being raped, for instance, by somebody you're very close to, perhaps your father, and that is so traumatic for you that memory is blocked off from the rest of your thinking patterns, and it goes out onto, say, a branch of that tree, and it just is held there by an alter personality. And it may stay there for 20, 30, even 40 or so years until you're in a safe situation. And then your mind says, okay, it's okay to process this memory now, so the memories start coming back. That's what was happening to these two cousins that came to me, is that they had been through this trauma as children, and they had repressed those memories, and so they grew up, knowing that they had been abused, but not really understanding how or why, or having blank periods of their life. The blank periods are usually alter personalities who take over while the mind is in a traumatic state. For instance, I wrote this book, 22 Faces Inside the Extraordinary Life of Jenny Hill and Her 22 Multiple Personalities. And if you go into our website, 22faces.com, you can read the first 3 chapters of that book for free. And in those 3 chapters, I started her out as a 5-year-old child, and she's walking to kindergarten, and she can remember going out the door, and then she wakes up in her kindergarten class, and she can't remember the time between leaving her house and arriving at school. The reason for that is because one of her alter personalities took over, because she had to walk past the corner house, and in the corner house she was being raped, and so that was so traumatic for her, just to walk past that house, that an alter personality took over for that period of time to protect her until she got to school. That's what these little children, have to suffer through, is these blank periods, but it's actually a protection for their mind. So that's how I got involved, is these women started approaching me. They asked me to go out with them to validate some of their memories. We went out to several sites where they claimed they saw murders and were raped by their fathers and that. And as we did that, more and more of these memories came back. And what was interesting about these two is that they were both there as young children together, and they could remember the exact same details. They'd go home after we'd been out to a certain place, and they'd each have their separate memories of what happened, and then we'd get together, and their memories validated each other, that this happened, and so-and-so was there, and this is what happened, and this is what the victim looked like, and things like that. So that's how, that portion of my life happened. To get into that, what actually happened with that situation is that we were going out trying to collect all this information because these women's father was the first arrest of the Utah Attorney General's Satanic ritual abuse investigators. And that's a whole other story about how they got hired. Back in 1980, there was a book that came out called Michelle Remembers, and it was by Michelle Smith and Dr. Lawrence Pazder. Dr. Pazder is a psychiatrist in Canada, and Michelle was a little girl in Canada who had been given as a 5-6-year-old child to a satanic coven by her mother. And so she went through all this ritual abuse as a child. And 40 years later, these repressed memories started coming back to her about all this rapes and murders that she'd seen as a child. And so she went to Dr. Pazder for therapy, and that was the book was about that they wrote was about her life. When that came out, in 1980, it became a bestseller. And then all of a sudden, you had just huge amount of people going to therapists saying, this happened to me. I have these repressed memories. I have been ritually abused. There were so many going to therapists that in 1983, there was a professional organization formed called the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. And they formed specifically to treat ritual abuse survivors because they didn't have any treatment modules in order to know how to treat these repressed memories. And the American Psychiatric Association hadn't provided that, so they formed their own association, ISSTD, very large organization, has around 900 therapists in it from what I have been able to gather today, and they mainly treat dissociation, which and a lot of those are ritual abuse survivors. Another thing that happened during that time period is that all these people were going to different therapists. Well, in the LDS, I'm from Utah, and it's the headquarters of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS. They had social services offices all over across the United States and Mexico and Canada, and people were coming into their office, saying the same thing, that they had been ritually abused. So they, of course, reported that on up to the church. The president of the church at the time was Ezra Taft Benson. Brother Benson was, he used to be Secretary of Agriculture under Dwight D. Eisenhower at the time he was president of the LDS Church. But at this very same time he was getting all these reports from LDS Social Services, he's from Idaho. And there was a little baby not far from where he grew up that was, found in a trash can. It was dead, and it had all of its organs missing. And Idaho never did find the perpetrators. They did eventually find a witness to the murder, but they never prosecuted the perpetrators. But as a result of that baby's death, they formed the first ritual abuse law in the nation. It's called the Baby X Law in Idaho. So all this was going on in Idaho, and President Benson was getting this about his, area where he grew up, and then he was getting all these reports. So he formed a committee. It was a 12-person committee, and they went out and interviewed these different people across the United States that were going into LDS Social Services and got information from them. The person who headed that committee was Elder Glenn Pace. He was one of the general authorities in the church. So after all this committee did all their studies, then Elder Pace wrote this memo to President Benson and essentially gave a report on what they had been looking at. And in the memo, it says 45 members witnessed human sacrifice. Well, when this memo got on the Internet a couple of years later, of course, they were getting hundreds of reporters and news people calling church offices wanting to interview Elder Pace. He would never give a interview on the memo. But later on, when I was writing my book, I had information about the LDS report in the book, and I had it at a very large publisher in New York, and they said, well, you can't put this information in unless you have an interview with Elder Pace. So I wrote the first presidency and told them the situation. And a week or so later, Elder Pace granted me the only interview that he's ever given on that report. What he told me was that they ended up interviewing over 100, mainly women, and in order to verify the information, they actually hired a genealogist, and they traced back the family lines of these victims in order to identify the perpetrators. And it says in the report, and they did, they excommunicated what perpetrators they found in the church. Then they turned over the information to the Utah Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office, at the very same time that the LDS report was going on, they had also formed a committee, and it was co-chaired by Dr. Noemi Mattis. Dr. Mattis is a PhD psychologist. She also has her JD degree. And they went out and they interviewed all the investigators and therapists in the state that were dealing with ritual abuse issues, and they found some of the same information as in the LDS report, because a lot of the people in the LDS court obviously were from Utah. And so they had these two reports, and as a result of these reports, they got funding through the state legislature to hire satanic ritual abuse investigators at the state. Well, when these investigators were hired, their very first arrest was this man who was the father of these cousins that I was working with. And so what we were doing was we were trying to gather information to get them to charge him. They just charged him with molest of one child, and we were trying to get information to get them to charge, more, because these women had seen many children murdered. They could verify each other, So I spent about a year or so with these women going around and gathering this information. The bottom line is we turned in the information to the Utah AG, Attorney General's office, and the investigators, and I went up and interviewed them, and I interviewed with Lieutenant Attorney General Reed Richards. But the bottom line is that they couldn't get enough against this man to charge him with anything more. He got off on a quirk of the law and got released. So I was very frustrated at this point. So I was taking this information out to other legal entities, and one of the people I approached was an FBI agent. The very same day I approached him, Jenny Hill had approached him also. Jenny Hill was ritually abused down in Garden Grove, California, and her entire life she wanted to have her, she saw a little child murdered, and she wanted to find the parents of this child, and so she had approached this FBI agent. She had since moved to Utah, and she approached this FBI agent and asked him to open up a case. She was trying to find these parents to tell him about this little child that she saw murdered. The FBI wouldn't open a case for her. They wouldn't open a case for me, but they did put us together. And that's how I met Jenny Hill. That was about 24 years ago, and about 20 years ago, excuse me. And we got together, and she asked me to write her biography. So that's how I got into, that's a long version of the story, but that's how I was introduced to satanic ritual abuse.
You've written many articles about this. I think we pulled up a couple of them on Before It's News. And one in particular we'd like to kind of dig into is the connection with the Vatican and this particular subject, and how they're involved in what's come forth recently about their connection with it, and what kind of court cases have come up around it.
Yes, that's very interesting also. That was all started by a man by the name of Kevin Annett. He's a minister from Canada. He's also an archaeologist and a very brilliant person. But about the same time that I began working with these women 20 years ago with ritual abuse, he was up in Canada, and he had been assigned to an Indian reservation up there, and for his pastoral duties. He realized that the native Indians weren't coming to church, and so he got to know them, and he found out that they, way back in the 1880s, the Canadian government and the Catholic Church and the United Church of Canada and the Lutheran Church had made a pact. They were trying to get rid of the Indian tribes because they wanted their land, they wanted their oil. And so they made a pact to start some residential schools. They created 80 residential schools across Canada. They required the Indian children to go to these residential schools as early as age 5 and stay at these residential schools. And then at the residential schools, they would infect them with smallpox. They would do human experiments on them. They would rape them. They would do all kinds of torture stuff to them. And I'm talking over a course of about 20 years, Kevin Annett gathered the evidence that there were 50,000 missing Native children. And he worked with the Indian tribes and tried to get this into court in Canada. They absolutely refused any litigation on everything, so we eventually took it to the UN and then eventually ended up over in Brussels in 2011. They started a court over in Brussels, and it's called the International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels. They had 6 legal judges and 28 jury members, international, and they presented this evidence. And if you go into our other website, it's called childabuserecovery.com, childabuserecovery.com. You will find his book. It's called Hidden No Longer, and you can read it for free off that website. Hidden No Longer is a compilation of all of the evidence that they gathered and presented at this court hearing beginning in 2011. It actually lasted for over a year until 2013, and it ended in February of 2013. And I'm talking about witnesses that came in and testified about being raped, about being in a child exploitation rings. What they have found in that court, that there was a exploitation ring run at the Vatican, according to witnesses, run at the Vatican that would use children for sexual exploitation and all kinds of stuff. And it is composed of global elite people. One of the things that they found in that, by the way, in February of 2013, when they came out with their verdict, they found 40 global elite members guilty of different crimes. One of those persons was Joseph Ratzinger, who was the Pope at the time. A couple of days after that court verdict came out is when he resigned from office. Another person they found guilty in that was Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Back in, let's see, it was 2000. I had the dates in my mind a minute ago. Anyway, there were 10 children in October the 10th, 2000 and I can't remember the date. Anyway, it all 1964, October the 10th, 1964. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were seen taking 10 children from the Kamloops residential school in British Columbia, and those 10 children haven't been seen since. They had several witnesses to that. 2 of those witnesses were going to testify at the court, and they were actually, we think, suicided or killed. They were, and that's what some of my articles is about, but they did have the video testimony of these people, and so they still presented it at court, and Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were found guilty of the disappearance of these 10 children. That's all in Hidden No Longer, which can be found on the CAR website. But that's actually how we found out that there was an international problem that's composed of global elites. After that court hearing that ended in February of 2013, there were suddenly there were just I don't know how many witnesses they have come forward. I know at least 18 have testified at this new trial. They started a new trial in March of this year where they're trying members of what they call the Ninth Circle Satanic Cult. It's the Ninth Circle Child Sacrifice Cult is actually what it's referred to. But they've had 18 or so witnesses that have, as children, that were abused and tortured by these cult members, and they have tied in the royalty. They've tied in members of the Canadian and U.S. governments, politicians, and all types of global elite people that are members of the Satanic cult, and they do this in Catholic cathedrals all over the world. If you go in on the internet, you can actually see some of these videos of people who testify, that they were in, I know there's one that says that she was in the catacombs of the Vatican itself and saw a little boy killed as a young girl. I think she was 12 at the time. And there's other people that have verified this. Like I say, they've got 18 witnesses so far. So I became acquainted with Kevin Annett because he put out a video on the internet from a therapist in Holland who was one of these victims of this ninth circle. And she, of course, is older now, and she testified on this video about much the same testimony as Jenny has. We have a video of Jenny, and she talks about the human sacrifice ceremony that she had to attend. That's also on the internet. And this therapist from Alice, Toss Ninjas is her name, her testimony and how she reacts to this is so much like Jenny's that I called Kevin and said, I think we have some information in common. And that's when I started to work with him about a year ago. And I've been writing newspaper articles about what's been going on at the court ever since.
Oh, thank you so much for continuing this work. I just wanted to kind of dig into the really, the core of this is like how in the world do they get access to these children? And, what is the point in taking these children, and what are they doing with them, and why is this even why is this even going on, in your opinion?
One question I wanted to ask was, it wasn't, involved in what you were asking, Kimberly, is, do they use orphanages, psychiatric wards as well for this?
They use everything. The Vatican uses Catholic orphanages, according to these witnesses. The present Pope Francis was involved during the junta, during the dirty war down in Argentina, where the Pope is from. They had, killed all these political prisoners, and they put their children into Catholic orphanages. And the Pope Francis was actually very active in getting these children into the child exploitation ring through the Vatican, according to what these witnesses have said. That's one way they do it. Another way they do it is, like Jenny, she was mind-controlled by the CIA, mind-control person by the name of Dr. Greenbaum. I can go to that in a minute. But they procure children from, whatever resources they have. Sometimes these satanic families will actually sell their children into the program. Another reason, another way that they get children is, and this sounds really gross, but I've heard this from several survivors, is that they'll produce their own. They will impregnate their own children. They will take the babies, prematurely, and then they'll use them for child sacrifices. A baby being sacrificed is very, very common among the satanic world because they can produce their own. They're born without birth certificates. They have no way of tracing them. Sometimes they'll take runaway teenagers, impregnate them, take the baby, and then kill the teenager and the baby at the same time. But they're very cunning in what they do. These women that I worked with, we connected up 5 children here in Utah who had been kidnapped and traced them to some of the instances that they saw. And some of that information will be coming out in another book that I'm writing called Saints, Sinners, and Satan. But sometimes it's done through kidnapping, although I don't think that that's used so much anymore because they're much more cunning in what they do. They'll usually produce their own, or they will, like I say, they'll get a teenager and impregnate them and take them there, or they'll get them from the Catholic orphanages. which seems to be very pervasive. And the reason I can say this is because this is information that I haven't made up. This is information that witnesses have testified to before legal judges in court and said, this is what happened. This Toast Ninjas, that's the therapist from Holland, and you can go in and see her video. That's also on our website, childabuserecovery.com. Her video's in there, and she is from a multi-generational satanic family. That she was born into the coven, is what they say, and actually grew up in the coven. And a lot of the witnesses that have testified before this international court have been born to satanic families. Although I will say one thing, is that at least in the investigation that I have done, and this is true in Jenny's family too, is that it's usually not both parents. It's just the one parent, and the wife generally doesn't even know that it's going on. That's what happened with these two cousins. One of them, their mother was satanic, but the other one, the mother had been married to this guy for, I think, 23, 24 years, had no idea that he was doing this to her children. And it wasn't until after they were divorced and all this information started coming out. Again, it has to do with this repressed memories where they come out so many years after the event that she realized that this had happened to her. And, of course, this produces all kinds of guilt with the mothers of these children that have taken them through them. I know of a woman here in the area where I live who one day one of her children came home from school and confessed that the father had been doing this to the other children. She made arrangements through the church to just get out of there that day, and she went back east and is living back there, and even her close family members don't know where she is to this day. This was like about 30 years ago. She doesn't know, they don't know to this day where the family lived back east, and they call her once a week at a certain phone number that isn't even her own phone number in order to keep in contact with her. But this is how she got out of this satanic stuff, once she found out that it was going on to her children. So many times it can go on within the family without other family members even knowing it's going on, and oftentimes it'll be the oldest child that's being abused, and the other children won't even know it's going on and not be abused. And this is how the perpetrators get away with it. This is what happened in Jenny's family, is that she was the only child that was abused as far as we know, where the other children were left completely, out of it. And this is one way the perpetrators have of deceiving everybody, just by doing it to one child and then leaving the rest alone. Did I answer your question? I can't remember where I started.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. What do they think they're going to get out of these rituals that they're performing, and that includes the blood drinking? Do they think that they gain power, some kind of spiritual evolution through the blood drinking of certain individuals through rites? And what type of rites in particular are involved in this?
The word power, I think, says it all. This is all about power. This is all about gaining power. Somehow they feel like if they can drink the blood of these children, that they get some big high out of it. It's all this, what I call mumbo-jumbo of the satanic stuff. It does have to do with evil spirit takeovers. My personal belief is that the great Creator made us all, but we also have a person around called Lucifer, and Lucifer has his followers, his spirits, that are trying to take over people's bodies, and this seems to be the main purpose of the satanic ceremony. The formal satanic ceremony is to get these evil spirits to come into the ceremony and take over the minds and bodies of the participants of the ceremony. They get some big high out of doing all this. But it's all about power and glory and having power over the people. That's the reason for developing multiple personalities in children, is that if you can take a child and traumatize them throughout childhood and divide their mind into multiple personalities, then you supposedly can have control over them for the rest of their life, because just by calling forth the name of the altered personality, you can get that personality to take over the body of the child or even of the adult. And then you kind of have to understand multiplicity in order to understand about this power situation and mind control. In the front part of 22 Faces that I wrote, there is Jenny's altar chart, and how the mind, everybody, when this happens to a child, their minds divide in different ways. Like I know one really fantastic person. Her name's Felicity. She runs a dissociation group up in Washington, and it's really a great healing group. It's called Ivory Garden for anybody that has dissociation. It's a fantastic website to get on. But she says that her mind is so fractured that she doesn't know how many personalities she has. And this is true of anybody. I mean, I have a very good friend who has 50 multiple personalities, and she didn't even know how many multiple personalities she had until I helped her with her book, and we actually counted them, and we, counted 50 personalities as she was writing her book. Jenny's broke in 3 different family lines, and what an altar family is that there's a head altar. For instance, Jenny had a sexual abuse altar that she called herself JJ, and JJ took over during the time when Jenny said that she was sexually abused, to take the trauma of that sexual abuse as a young child. Imagine it being a young, her abuse started at age 4, and being a young child, your mind just can't handle that abuse, and so this altar formed by the name of JJ, and she took the memory of that sexual abuse. Well, JJ only likes the pleasurable parts of sex, so that when other, painful things, this reoccurred to her almost on a weekly basis. So as the abuse continued and it got worse and more painful, JJ didn't want to handle that memory, so she broke out her own altar that would handle certain situations. And if you look in the front part of 22 Faces, you can see that, altar chart breakdown of all these different altars under JJ that broke out, because they're very specific in how they function and what they do. Then there's another altar family inside Jenny called the occult family, and these are the altars that they're headed by Altar Angelique. Angelique was formed by this master mind control programmer, Dr. Greenbaum, that was mind controlling Jenny, and he named her Angelique. But Angelique took over the torture of the ritual abuse, and then as different torture situations came up with Jenny, then other altars formed, and a lot of these altars formed in this big satanic ceremony that she went to, where she saw this other child killed. But there were several altars that were formed during that. Then she has a third altar family that named herself Vanessa, and this happened when JJ was a preteen. JJ took over and got Jenny into a situation where she was gang raped, and she was gang raped by a group of Mexican boys, and so this altar Vanessa formed as a Latino, and she thinks of herself as a Latino, a grown woman who's a Latino, but she's only one altar in that family. So she has these 3 altar families, but that one just has the one altar in it. But that's how her mind, made the decision to break down. There are others that just have fractured parts, and some even aren't full-blown altars. And then there are some altars that seem to be apparent in all of these people that have multiple personalities, and one of them is this they call the spiritual altar, and it seems to be the altar that handles the spiritual experiences. Where another altar is in Jenny is called she calls her the Lady of Peace and Harmony, and she's the altar that formed that kind of looks like Jenny's grandmother, because Jenny's grandmother was the only protective person in Jenny's life. And so this altar takes the form of Jenny's grandmother in Jenny's mind and looks like her grandmother, and she kind of tries to create harmony within the system. There seems to be, among multiples, at least one altar that does try to create harmony within the different altar personalities, try to keep the peace. And then there's, of course, a lot of them have homicidal altars, because, if this has happened to them, they do feel like, killing other people because, all this abuse is going on to them. So they have a homicidal altar. And then they also have a suicidal altar. Those four altars seem to be quite common among multiple personalities, just because of their abuse experiences. But it's important to remember that these altars are all part of the person. They aren't something on the outside. It's not like a evil spirit takeover. It's very, very different. In fact, Jenny has had evil spirit takeovers, and she says the feeling is very, very different. Her altars are inside of her. They're a part of her. They're a part of her personality that are just, broken away from her, central line of thinking, where these evil spirits, when they have taken over, they come in through, different orifices of her body, and literally, take over the body. And then in Jenny's instances, she had several altar takeovers while she was in treatment at the Utah State Psychiatric Hospital for a year, and during that time, she had several altar takeovers, and then they would call the LDS elders, and they would come and bless them, and the evil spirits would leave. But Jenny says that this was very, very different from the multiple personalities. The thing about multiple personalities is they're so misunderstood. When we went on the Dr. Phil show, I was really quite upset about them because they depicted Jenny in this video as having this homicidal altar that was just, out there, out of control. And actually, that isn't what happened. The altar personality that's homicidal is a result of child abuse, and it's a reaction of the mind, to try to protect the mind. And so it's not like a multiple is out there that's, going to kill somebody. It's just their reaction to child abuse. And it's very disappointing to see multiple personalities depicted as these weird people, because we could all be multiple personalities if we had been through some of the child abuse that these people had been through. And again, I don't know where I started, so I don't know if I answered your question. Is there part of it that I haven't answered yet?
Yeah. Are there local factions, like in every small town, do these type of things go on at, I'm sure they do, just local churches using Sunday school, even local lodges? And are there certain rites, R-I-T-E-S, that you see a pattern being involved in these?
They seem to function independently, but they also kind of have knowledge of each other's, ceremonies and rites, and they do things in certain ways to get this big feeling of power and glory or whatever. So they do, I know with the work that I have done here in Utah, that the different covens are, they function, there are 8 covens in Utah, and they function very independently, but yet sometimes they go to each other's ceremonies. In fact, they actually pay big bucks to go to these ceremonies. There's always child pedophilia involved. They always get this big high from, having sex with children and then having this ceremony where they kill a child and drink the blood. And so they'll pay big bucks to go to these ceremonies. They'll pay, and that's what these snuff films are all about. They'll film the ceremony, and then they'll have big viewings, and the people will pay thousands of dollars to go to these viewings and watch, this satanic ceremony for the big high they feel. It's an addiction, just like a sexual addiction, which is, part of this, is also an addiction to rape and kill. And that's, they think they're getting all this power, but actually it's, I feel it's Lucifer having power over them, because, he's got them hooked on what they're doing. I didn't say too much about the CIA mind control program, but actually Jenny was mind controlled down the street by this man that's called Dr. Green. And Dr. Green is mentioned in several, there were two hearings that were heard that were held by Congress in 1995 and 1977. The CIA mind control was started after the war. They brought all these Nazi mind control experts over from Germany. Hitler was really into mind control and into satanic worship. And after the war, the CIA started in 1953, and they actually began with the CIA mind control back in 1953. They brought all these experts into the United States, and they put them at various universities and colleges, and they would use these little children and do experiments on them. And finally, in 1977, they had a congressional hearing on it. They were supposed to have, the program was supposed to have been closed down because back in 1964, they had a lawsuit. They had this program both not only in the United States but also in Canada. Canadian and U.S. governments were working together with these mind control experts, Nazis, including Mengele, by the way. And they were doing the experiments, and they were also doing the experiments on these little Indian children up in Canada also. That's what Kevin Annette's research is about also. But there was a lady up in Canada who sued the government because she was a survivor of this mind control experimentation, and she won the lawsuit back in 1964. And so after that, the CIA supposedly closed down their program. Well, by 1977, the program was still found to be going on, and so they had this congressional investigation, and they had these hearings on it. These survivors came in and talked about it, and Kathy O'Brien's book talks about some of this. She was one of the witnesses with this. And the problem with this was that even though the CIA said it wasn't going on anymore, you still had witnesses coming in and saying, yeah, it went on, and I was in it, and, this happened to me, and it was after 1964. The Congress voted not to release the information of these big hearings, and as far as we know, nothing was done about it. Then we have the same thing happen in 1995, where more witnesses are still coming forward and saying, this is still going on, I was abused back then, and we want Congress to do something about it. So they have some more hearings in 1995. They call them the radiation experiment hearings, and you can see some of the those on the internet. Just Google 1995 CIA radiation experiments, and there's two videos of, well, it's actually three videos of, there's a therapist and two survivors who is their actual witness testimony at these meetings. All three of those talk about Dr. Greenbaum in their testimony. And he was, there's more than one Dr. Greenbaum, because survivors have talked about Mengele, describing Mengele as being Dr. Greenbaum. But Jenny's Dr. Greenbaum, and it says this in the foreword to my book. It was written by Dr. Colin A. Ross. He's a psychiatrist who's written like 17 books. He's a very well-known psychiatrist. He's been on the History Channel talking about this. But he said that this Dr. Greenbaum came over to the United States as a 17-year-old Jewish turncoat who was over in the concentration camps, and he was brought into the U.S. Then, and the reason we know that this is the same Dr. Greenbaum as Jenny was abused by is because there was a study done by Dr. Corydon Hammond when this ISSTD was formed back in 1983. He did a study with 18 other therapists and their clients, and 75% of those clients, it's called the Greenbaum speech if you wanted to Google it, but 75% of those clients said that they were tortured by this Dr. Greenbaum, and they describe him the same way Jenny described him. Now, when Jenny told me about this man that was torturing her, she described him as short with balding brown hair, had a limp in his left leg and carried a cane and had a German accent. Well, she didn't know anything about Dr. Greenbaum, but as I read into Dr. Hammond's study, these clients in his study described Greenbaum in the very same way, short with balding brown hair, carried a cane, and had a limp in his left leg and a German accent. So we know that those people and Jenny were tortured by the same people, by the same Dr. Greenbaum. Then these, if you go into and see these videos of this 1995 congressional hearing, they talk about Dr. Greenbaum in there, and one of them said that they were actually in his office, in a cage in his office, and she got out of the cage one day and went through some papers and found some where he had been giving several $1 million to run the CIA program this Dr. Greenbaum has. Now, I don't know if this was Mengele or if it's Jenny's Dr. Greenbaum, but she called him Dr. Green in those hearings. So that's another, in answer to your earlier question, you know, that's another reason why this is going on, is because the CIA, we're actually paying for this through our tax dollars. We're actually paying for these children to be mind controlled, and they're supposedly, the program started out of in the first place because they wanted to develop these super spies, you know, for security reasons. And in Kathy O'Brien's book, Transformation of America, she was one of the witnesses in these hearings. She talks about how she cannot, you know, talk about this publicly because it was in the interest of national security that she not, but yet she was a young child who was being raped and tortured by all these politicians and that. But that's part of this CIA mind control program that is still going on as far as we know. And we know because there was a 2007 study that was done on ritual abuse survivors, and there's statistics in there about who was programmed by Dr. Greenbaum, and there's statistics in there about how many were programmed by the CIA. Then we've got a petition out on the internet too, trying to get another congressional hearing on the CIA mind control program. And if you go, you can go, and I hope your listeners do go into this petition. You go into that on our childabuserecovery.com website and sign the petition. And if you go into the petition and go into the early comments, there's about 50 early comments on this petition, because the petition was actually started by mind control survivors, and they talk about being mind controlled by the CIA. And some of them are in the U.S., some of them are in Canada, some are in Philippines, Australia. You know, they're all over the world where the CIA, you know, has done this to people. And it's a very pervasive problem that we've got all over the world, and we're, as taxpayers, we're paying for it out of our dollar. There's this, I don't know, what is it, $9 billion black budget that the CIA works on right now, and we have no accounting for where it goes. Well, you know, we're torturing children with our own taxpayer dollars.
All right. Here. Would you want to go into any details on the document called the Magisterial Privilege?
What I know about that is just what I've been told, you know, from Kevin Annette and the court over in Brussels, is that they have a contact at the Vatican who was able to get them a copy from the Vatican secret Vatican archives, and it's a document called the Magisterial Privilege. And it says in that document that before a person is made pope, they go through one of these 9th circle satanic cult ceremonies where they kill a baby and drink the blood. And that's what the document is quite old, if I remember. I can't remember the exact year on it. But we know that's taken place with the last, at least with this last Pope Francis, is because we have witnesses that are testifying at this court over in Brussels that were actually at the ceremony where they, you know, they take children or teenagers, you know, to these ceremonies because they're trying to mind control them. And so they'll take them. And now some of these witnesses have come forth, very brave people, and said that they were actually at those ceremonies and they were actually abused by the Pope during the ceremony, and and they actually, saw them kill a child. So, yeah, that's what I know about is just what's come out in court. Unfortunately, this court is going to be going on for some time, so we're not going to see the actual documents until after the court has made its decision, which probably will take at least another year. So everybody, I write these articles and people write, well, why don't you produce the documentation? Well, I can't because it's in the court. It's at the court right now, and it's not going to be released from the court until they, make their decision. But that's the information that Kevin Annett has released, so far from the court.
You believe that it's required that every pope partake in these rituals before they're, if you will, knighted as pope?
Well, according to this magisterial privilege, which is in the Vatican archives, it is. The other reason we know that is because the former Pope Ratzinger, the one that resigned after the last court hearing on him, we have had witnesses that have come forth since that hearing that said that they have seen him at these ceremonies, that they have actually seen him kill children. I think there's 4 witnesses that have come forth so far and said that. So that's all I know, is that there are witnesses that have said they've been there.
Do you see any connection with, I don't know about this, but do you see any connection with the CIA and the Vatican simultaneously doing projects together through their rings?
Well, most of our information comes from witnesses, and there are survivors who have contacted me that have said that they have been abused at Catholic facilities, in the basements of Catholic cathedrals, in the basements of Catholic churches. One of those information lines appears to have been set up by the CIA to do their CIA experimentation on these little children. I know the CIA worked with the Canadian government for these little native children. They did their experiments over in Canadian hospitals in Canada. So they worked with the Canadian government to get their victims from these native children. They appear to be working to get some of their victims through the Catholic Church. And I assume Catholic orphanages also, because that's what the victims are saying. Some of these children, of course, don't grow up. They get killed or die off because of what's happened to them. But other children do grow up to be adults, and they're like the cousins that I worked with. They get out of the situation, they get away from their perpetrators, and then they start having these memories that have come back. And those are the people that are saying, yeah, there is a connection there, that the CIA is working with the Catholic Church. But again, all I'm saying is that this is what the victims are saying. This is what the survivors are saying. And we have a real legal problem here because, I tried to get this into the FBI. I tried to get through the Utah AG office. I tried to get, all this stuff into court. With the people that I was working with, we knew the victims. We knew when we had 2 witnesses to the murders. We had where the murders took place, and yet they can't gather enough information to get it into court and take it through a court situation. And whenever you get a case into court and you mention satanic ritual abuse, you get all this publicity coming out, trying to defame you, trying to defame the witnesses, and so you have all these people that are in power that appear to be trying to suppress this situation. And so you're working against the legal system all the time. That's why Kevin Annett had to take it over to a Brussels court, because he couldn't get it into a Canadian court. I couldn't get the FBI to even listen to me. I couldn't get them to open a case. We even know the child's name, and it was this Kathleen Shea. She was and Jenny's, I get ahead of myself, I'm sorry. In Jenny's case, she saw a little child killed. And she identified that child eventually as being Kathleen Shea. Kathleen Shea was kidnapped from Tyrone, Pennsylvania 3 months prior to this satanic ceremony where Jenny says she saw her killed. So we have that information. We know who the victim is. We have a witness to the murder, and yet we can't even get the FBI to open up a case on it. We even know the perpetrators. We have their names, and we can't get the FBI.
Why do you feel that is? I mean, why do you feel like an organization like the FBI won't jump in here and actually go and defend these children?
Excuse me, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious as to why you feel, from your experience, why an organization like the FBI wouldn't, just jump in here and go and defend these children.
All I can say is I'm very, very frustrated about it. When I was told that it was because of the Lanning report, and what was the Lanning report was there was an FBI agent that gave a report saying, this satanic ritual abuse isn't going on, and he released it on the internet. I called the FBI office and asked them about this Lanning report, and they told me they wouldn't open up a case on Jenny because of the Lanning report. The FBI central offices told me that they didn't authorize that report and that Lanning had taken out retirement right after it came out on the internet. Yet this Lanning report is cited. It was cited to me when I was told that's why they wouldn't open up the case. So that tells me there's something wrong in that organization to have an agent tell me that he shouldn't open up a case and then call the headquarters and find out that, they didn't even authorize the report. So something inside the FBI is wrong there. Are we having a rough time? I can't hear you.
I'm here.
Okay.
Do you have something else you want to say, Eugene?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just dumbfounded to hear how this is going on. And, of course, we know that these things are going on, but given your experience and your, intimate relations with these types of people and all the victims and the testimonies and all this kind of stuff, it's very difficult for the typical individual who just watches television on the day-to-day, goes to work, and has a 9 to 5, to even begin to wrap their minds around what we're talking about here today, and the mind control and the ritual abuse and all this kind of stuff is so foreign to the quote normal person. And what effect do you see Jesus Christ having in this situation from your experience? I know that you mentioned that these LDS guys would come in, and certainly there are good people in all different sects of the church. And a couple of different questions that I have there for you is firstly, what role do we see Jesus playing here, and how does that help exonerate us from these situations and bring that power into these types of situations? And also, do you see the LDS having any type of involvement in these satanic ritual abuses?
Okay, in answer to your last question, absolutely not. The LDS Church is the only organization, formal religious organization that I have seen that has actually tried to do and is trying to do something about the situation. They did this report. They defined who the perpetrators were. They excommunicated the perpetrators. They will excommunicate anybody that's even remotely involved in something like this. And then they turned over all their information to the Utah AG office. So as far as the LDS Church is concerned, absolutely not. As far as people saying that they were abused by, I'm getting ahead of myself again, I'm sorry. Some survivors have said that as children they were ritually abused inside the Salt Lake Temple. What we have found over the years is that there is an organization who has built a structure that looks much like the inside of the LDS Temple, down the street from the Salt Lake LDS Temple, and there is a tunnel that goes into that place, and you take a drugged child through a dark tunnel, and then they come into the light, into the inside of a place that looks exactly like the inside of the Salt Lake Temple, and then they abuse them, and they use makeup to make them look like general authorities or whoever in the church, and then that memory is kept by the child for 20, 30 years, and then come out as an adult. They think they have been abused inside of the Salt Lake Temple by a general authority. I have heard that story before, many times by several different survivors, but as they go through the stories and as they realize what's going on, what's really going on is this elaborate system that the perpetrators have set up to make it look like that they have been abused in that situation. And this is what the perpetrators do. This is how they get away with it. This is how they cover themselves, is that if they can get a survivor to come out with an elaborate story that they have been abused by an alien, or if they've been abused by this important person, then they know that they'll be not believed. And when you don't have a body to take into court, when the person is saying they've been abused by somebody who obviously, wouldn't do something like that, then you have an unbelievable story, and it never gets, into a courtroom. So you have a lot of different situations going on with perpetrators that they purposely do in order to cover up the situation. And again, I apologize because I can't remember your original question.
I think most importantly, what I would really like to touch on is just the element of Jesus, what role Jesus actually plays in this, because what it sounds like is we're looking at the mockery of holiness, essentially, here. And of course, this is something that's warned about scripturally by Jesus. Just wondering your thoughts on how Jesus plays a role in bringing these things to light, and in your experiences with, when these people are, for example, taken over by these different spirits. Do we see that Jesus, the name of Jesus, is actually coming in to relieve these people of that, or what's your experience with that?
I think they purposely design their ceremonies so the victims will not rely on the gospel or rely on Heavenly Father or Jesus to get them through a spiritual situation. I know several survivors who are scared to death to go to church because of the abuse they went through as a child, and the perpetrators do this deliberately so that they can have control over the individual, so that the individual won't rely on a higher power in order to help them heal. My personal beliefs about what actually happens is that I believe that there was, before we all, we were all spirits of Heavenly Father, and we all lived before we came to this earth. And I believe that there was a great war in heaven prior to us coming to earth. And in that war, Jesus Christ said, we're going to create an earth, we're going to have these spirits come down, they're going to prove themselves, and then depending on how they prove themselves on earth is where they will live, in the hereafter. And then there was another person there called Lucifer who said, no, I don't think that they should have to prove themselves. I think, they could just go down and do whatever and enjoy life and do whatever they want and not be responsible for what they have to do. And so I think Heavenly Father and Jesus made the decision that, we needed the good and the bad there so that people would have the ability to choose between the good and bad. But the spirits that chose to go with Lucifer's plan could not have bodies. And so I believe the only spirits that were given bodies were those that chose to come down and prove themselves on where they would live with Heavenly Father, in the hereafters. And those who didn't want to do that were not given bodies, and those spirits chose to follow Lucifer, and Lucifer is continually trying to influence people down here to be on his side, so that they will be his followers when they leave this earth, and that those spirits who chose to follow him want a body so bad that they will try to enter various bodies. And I've heard a lot of survivors tell me, they say, I think there's a door in the back of my mind where these evil spirits are able to come in, and I find myself needing great spiritual strength in order to keep them out, because that seems to be the purpose of these ceremonies, is to allow these evil spirits to come in. I believe there is good and bad in this earth, and I believe that Heavenly Father sent us down here. He gave us this choice to be here. Jenny believes very firmly that she decided in the pre-existence that this was going to be her life, that she was going to come down here on earth. She was going to go through all the torture that she went through as a child, but she was doing it for a purpose. And she was actually told this purpose when she was young, and it has this in the book too, about it too, is that when she was about 7 or 8, she was really praying as to why she had all these blank periods. She didn't understand her life. She would jump from one day to the next and not know what happened in between. And of course, this is when her altars were taken over, but she didn't understand this, and she didn't even understand that she was being abused at the time. But in her prayer, she was told to write down her experiences. And so she would she started to journal back then. As she wrote in her journal, these altars would take over. And there's copies of her journal in the book that are really in the middle part of the book. You'll have to see them, where the altars, different altar writings change and that in there. And they even sign their name in there. But what I found in therapy is that writing is very, very important, because it lets the stress of the body get out. It lets these altars get out, their experiences. And so it's very therapeutic, and she did a lot of writing at the state hospital for this very reason. It was part of her therapy. So, this spiritual part of a person has to do with their healing. And a lot of these survivors have been trained not, to believe in a higher power, not to believe in Heavenly Father or Jesus Christ, and to be dependent on their perpetrators. That's part of their abuse. And so it's very specific, to the good and bad that we are going through here on earth. But I think Heavenly Father gave us a choice, and that's what we chose to do, and eventually we'll return to Him depending on what decisions we make in our life.
Yes, ma'am. Kimberly?
Yeah, I basically, if you'd want to take it to the macro here, this is a spiritual war, and I fully feel that that we are at, I guess if you want to call it end times, we're at a time where I don't believe that we are ending. We're ending an old paradigm and going into a new paradigm, one where this stuff is being exposed so that we can heal from it, not only individually but collectively. And my personal journey has went through a spiritual awakening. Back in 2002, my catalyst was 9/11, and I went within myself and said, I got a lot to be grateful for, but there's a void within me, and that's when God revealed Himself to me, and I could hear God speak to me. And
wow.
Everything that we do is guided by modeling what it looks like to be, if you will, Gandhi's quote is "be the change." And it's about how do we, and you're already doing it, Judy, and thank you for what you're doing, is that how do we fix this? This is really sick that our children have to go through this. I'm very emotional about it because I don't have children, but everything I do is to be their voice for the children that can't speak for themselves, in whatever way they're being abused. And we have to model what it looks like to be their voice. And we cannot stand for this any longer. what can we do? I mean, as an individual, signing the petition, I'll have that link up. We cannot tolerate this abuse. It's sickening. It's disgusting. It's a very sensitive subject for most people. Don't want to even listen to this stuff because they don't want to believe that it even is going on. What do you suggest that we can do as individuals to help support this, being their voice and preventing this stuff from happening? I mean, it seems so crazy to even think that this is going on. How can we support what you're doing?
I think denial is the biggest problem we have in our society, and it was easy for me to deny this was going on. I worked with these women for those years, and I met with so much opposition to what was going, that it was even happening, and you have all the opposition in the newspapers whenever a case comes out, and all this opposition really can be very discouraging, and it all has to do with denial, that we don't want to believe that this is going on. We don't want to believe that this is happening to little children. So one of the things we need to do is start to educate ourselves, to start searching the internet and reading some of this information that's readily available there. One of the ways that you can understand the children around you that may be undergoing this ritual abuse right now, and there are children all around you going through this, is to understand what a child with dissociation is like. So I would like to invite your listeners to read my book, 22 Faces, Inside the Extraordinary Life of Jenny Hill and Her 22 Multiple Personalities. You can get that book by going into our website, 22faces.com. And like I say, you can read the first 3 chapters there. But reading the entire book will give you a great understanding of what it's like to be a child with dissociation, what they react to, how they react, how they're feeling. And, like Jenny, she would go to school and her teacher could tell there was something wrong, but she didn't really understand, what was really going on. Teachers could intervene with children who have dissociation if they know what to look for. We can intervene as neighbors and even relatives. I get a lot of people who come up to me and say, well, I have a relative, or I know a neighbor, or I have a friend that's been through this, and it's amazing to me how prevalent it is, and the only reason I know about it is because I've been outspoken about it, and so people, feel safe in coming up to me and talking to me about it. Where where I lived in Orem, there were 30 people who had been ritually abused living within walking distance of my home, and the only reason I knew that is because I was acquainted with the survivor community, and they would tell me of their friends and family and whatever that was involved. So they're all around us, and it's not just in Utah. I think it's just more known here because of the LDS Church and what they've done to try to prevent it going on. But it's all throughout the nation. There's entire police forces who are specially trained in satanic ritual abuse that try to do something about it. It never comes up in court because once you mention that in court, they're not going to they get all this negative publicity in the papers about it, so they'll try the person on, say, child abuse or something like that rather than ritual abuse. But it is very prevalent all throughout the United States, all throughout the world. I think Kevin Annette's stuff shows that it's global. It's being done everywhere. And so we need to recognize that there are children going through it right now. Our own government, the CIA, is mind-controlling children right now. We need to find those children and try to help them in some way. And we can't do that if we're in denial. So you can, read the book, read 22 Faces, understand what a child is like. We'd love you to go in and sign that petition on childabuserecovery.com. We're trying to work with different senators to try to get this, back into another investigation, if that's even possible.
Well, what type of response have you seen out of these senators in order to help us expedite this process of the healing and exposing these types of things to these children?
Well, senators are senators, and they'll say, we'll take a look at it if you can get enough people interested in it, and we need 5,000 signatures on a petition before we'll even talk to you. So that's the kind of response we've gotten. Of course, they get approached, every day by different people for different reasons, and they're in denial also that it's going on. Plus some of their colleagues are involved, so we have that other, faction there. But the one thing about this petition that it can do is it can make people, by signing the petition, by sending it out to your friends and family, through the internet, it'll make more people aware of what's going on. And that's what we're doing with this petition, is trying to wake up the public that this is happening and we need to do something about it. So even if we never get it into another investigation, at least by signing the petition, by sending it on to others, people will read the information and go on. And by the way, it's very interesting. There's an article in that petition about the petition itself. I had written like 54 articles for the Examiner, which is an online newspaper, and that is the link to that article. But unfortunately, when I started writing about Pope Francis, for some reason, they took all 54 of my articles down. But and so it doesn't actually link into anything right now, but it does give some information on there. And that article is still available on my website, childabuserecovery.com. All 54 articles are. But
why do you think that they took that down as a response to writing about Francis?
Well, it's pretty obvious to me.
I would say you're exactly right. I really want to focus on the FBI here. I mean, we're talking about an organization that's supposed to protect us, that is currently boasting of their, anti-public corruption campaign within their ranks. And to think that they are going to cite a report that is an unofficial report from a retired, agent with their force is absolutely ridiculous, and some cockamamie scam to basically hide what's going on here. And it's just something I am unable to tolerate when I hear this kind of stuff. And so, I'm going to be brainstorming on ways in which to basically take it to their door with this and say, what's really going on here? Because I've had it. When we hear these types of things coming out, it's not like, we could have the denial about it all day. It does not negate the suffering of children and other people out here if we just think that we're daydreaming off in our own little la-la land, and so it drives me up the wall to hear about this. And so any ways that anybody out there, a listener or yourself, guys, can think of a way to get this back in front of there, because I tell you what, there are good people in the FBI. There are good people who would love to nail these people who are doing this, and anybody trying to cover it up within their own organization. And those are the people that I intend to find.
Well, I agree totally. There are very good people in the CIA. There are very good people in the FBI. There are good people all over the place. The problem is the perpetrators are so cunning and so elaborate in their cover-up that it's very, very difficult to do a heck of a lot about it. But we can do each a little in our own way, in whatever, in whatever facet you are. If you identify a child that you think is being ritually abused or abused in any way, you report it, you follow up on the report, you make sure that they get, into a safe situation, then you have done your part. But we all have to be aware. We all have to get out of denial, because that's the first problem is the denial. I even, when I was doing this, I got to a point where I literally took boxes of research and just put them underneath the basement stairs and just left them there. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. A couple of years later, I pulled them out again because I thought I can't allow this to go on. I have to do something about it. It's easy to deny. But it tears on your soul. You have to do something about these little children. They're innocent and they're precious and they're Heavenly Father's children, and we need to help them.
You have to. Oh yeah.
And that's what we're here to do. That's the whole point in us coming together today is, it is for us to be a voice for those who are innocent and don't have the means to and the resources to protect themselves. So it is up to us to come together and be a voice for them. I really appreciate everything that you've done, Judy. It's a really sensitive subject to cover, and I would really encourage everyone to read your book and to be part of whether you have a child in your life or not. I mean, it's really up to us. If we don't step up here, then who's going to do it? It really is a call to action for us to be part of being the solution for these children that are being abused and stop it now. Any child that we can save from being this abused changes the world. So I just want to thank you for being with us today. If you guys want to add any more, or we can go ahead and close the show for the day. But we will have all the links up, Judy, to everything that you mentioned so that everyone can be part of the solution and get involved in their community, to be able to identify any children that might have these dissociations. I would really love to reach out to the teachers who see this happening with their children in the schoolrooms so that they can get them into the right places, because they're working with the children on a daily basis. If you know of any groups of teachers or such that might be able to start some sort of collaboration in that way, could you share that if you know of anyone? Any groups?
I just know that the International Society of Study of Trauma and Dissociation, ISSTD, is a very active therapist group. Anybody that wants therapy, that's a good place to go to get some help on who might be appropriate in your community to help you. As far as reporting it is concerned, you have to rely on your basic police force and child protective services, but be aware that there are people planted in some of those organizations that are there specifically to try to disrupt whatever referrals you're trying to give as far as these children are concerned. We just have to be aware that this is something that's very big and very global, and these people have a lot of power, but the power is within ourselves. We don't have to be afraid. I think Satan used fear to control us, and if you do something about the situation, you feel good about it, you pray about it, you think, what can I do, and let Heavenly Father guide you in that, then we have nothing to fear about. And it's something that we can really help those children if we just remain aware and decide that we're going to do something about it. I really appreciate you inviting me. I think you're brave for doing it. It's something that we need to follow up on, hopefully at a future date, and if I can be of help, I'd be glad to come back.
Yeah, I'd like to stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Judy. I really thank you for your work, and I have a lot of questions that I really didn't get a chance to ask you today, and I'd like to probably after this, and I'd love to have you back at some point in the future after we can kind of show some of the things that we've done and kind of further this conversation. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
You're a brave woman. To my knowledge, no one else, you probably know some of the people, no one else is coming and as upfront as you are about these subjects that are ultimately going to be stopped. Our momentum is so strong that they're not going to be able to withstand it any longer. It is going to be stopped. And you're a very brave woman. Keep up the great work.
Yes, and we will follow up with you, Judy, on another interview, especially regarding these court cases that are in play. Would like to make sure that we stay up with your writings, and we'll have the links up too so people can carry on and see what you're sharing with the articles that you're writing and kind of where we are. Denial is not going to work any longer. That's the whole point in having this conversation. In order to do something about it, we have to acknowledge what's going on and then be part of the solution. So on that note, I want to thank everyone for being with us today, and please get into action. Look at all the materials that we're putting up for you to get out of denial and see what's going on and be part of the solution. And I want to thank everyone for being here, and on that note, we'll go ahead and close the show. And God bless everyone. Please be being part of the solution.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.